2019 is only a few days old, but there's already a lot going on here in New Mexico, especially with a new governor in less than 2 weeks until the start of a new legislative session. We've been grateful to be joined by a special line panel of all working journalists in the last 2 weeks to count down the top stories of 2018, but we couldn't let them go without first talking about some of the stories and issues they'll be watching and covering in the new year. Welcome to the Line Table. I'm Gene Grant. We spent a lot of time the last few weeks with this special table of local journalists counting down the top stories of 2018. But before we let them get back to work, we wanted to know what they will be looking for in 2019. Jeff Proctor of the Santa Fe Reporter and In Depth, let's start with you. Any predictions or stories you're chomping at the bit to get at in 2019? Things that are just haunting you that you want to get at?
I'm a pretty haunted guy, Gene.
I love you for it.
In terms of predictions, the first thing I'll really be interested to see, because of my particular area of focus as a journalist, is what slice of the money pie is the criminal justice system going to get. It's in competition with education, economic development, and all kinds of other sort of big ticket campaign items. Right. But you know, we have some real systemic problems, some of which can actually be solved by money. This is something I just can't say enough. New Mexico has the worst paid judges in the country. That's something that needs to get fixed. Right. We have a chronically underfunded public defender department. We have prosecutors who don't make enough money. We have law enforcement shortages. So I will be paying really close attention during the session to see what slice of the pie criminal justice gets. Another thing, I don't know if this is so much a prediction, I'm really interested to see what ends up happening this year with the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office. There have been some really serious, heavy-duty, seemingly systemic related allegations sort of tossed at BCSO in the last couple of years. As APD, its next door neighbor, has fallen over Department of Justice oversight. They've had some really, really controversial and high profile shootings and other kinds of use of force incidents. Of course, the voters did just elect Manny Gonzalez to be the sheriff for another term, the guy who just under no circumstances will ever put a body camera on one of his officers. So I'm interested to see if the county commission decides that it wants to play a bigger role at long last in the function of the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office. Those are two, and obviously there's a really, I think, very, very important transparency issue playing out in federal court right now. Please. In terms of the way court records get sealed in federal court. Whether those happen to be pleadings, sometimes hearings themselves. I wrote a couple of stories recently about this and found that the process that's been in place forever and ever, just one of those classic New Mexico stories of, oh, that's just the way we always do it. Lawyers, in other words, prosecutors and defense lawyers, have been deciding what records get filed under seal instead of judges making that decision. That actually violates the court's own rules. Wow. And the public has a huge interest in seeing the function of justice. So that's a big problem. You know, the erosion of trust in government institutions often happens in darkness. So that's something I think that your viewers can continue to follow my byline on. I'm looking to sue somebody.
We'd love to have you come back in when there's a turn on any of those things and talk one-on-one about that, because those are three big items you just laid out there. Interesting. Andy Lyman, New Mexico Political Report, what are you looking at for 2019?
I think the immediate thing I'm going to be looking at is just directly the relationship between the governor and the state house and the state senate. I want to see who kind of emerges as a vocal Democratic critic of the Democratic governor. We saw that under Richardson. The Senate was a little bit more friendly, or a little bit more willing to criticize the governor. I'm curious on who that's going to be in this case, and how the House is going to deal with having the governor there. Also, how some of these her appointments work out. You know, and the Education Department has a lot of work, not just money-wise, but how they're going to probably have to craft a plan to provide to the federal government and say, this is, you know, that's the way it's set up right now. Is my understanding is that the federal government has to approve your plan and say yes, but it's also sort of it allows them to come up with their own plan as long as it meets these criteria. It's a little different than before, but yeah, how that comes up, what kind of plan they present to the federal government, and then if Trump's administration says, you know, we agree with it.
It is interesting. On your point about what Democrat might step up and be that alt voice there, any predictions on who that might be? And,
I think that's
just based on history.
It's a tough one. I think it's really hard to say. I think a lot of the people, a lot of the vocal critics before are no longer around. Michael Sanchez is no longer around.
Right.
I know that Jacob Candelaria is pretty outspoken in his points of view. I don't know where his views would line up or butt heads with Michelle Lujan Grisham. So
that could be one to watch. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that always happens. There's always somebody in the same party that jumps up, and that's their role, so to speak, whether self-appointed or not. So we'll see what happens. Inez Russell-Gomez, editorial page editor at the Santa Fe New Mexican. You look at a lot of different things to opine about. What are you looking at for 2019?
We'll obviously be focusing on the session to start with, and to see, you know, how organized it is. I mean, obviously they're always chaotic, but do you spend all your time doing memorials and praising each other, or do you get tax reform passed? Because really, with extra money, now is the time to do systemic tax reform in a way that hopefully will springboard us to better economic performance. I'm personally looking to see how well the Meow Wolf expansion works out. Meow Wolf is the art immersion experience that started in Santa Fe in an old bowling alley, and it is going to be opening in Las Vegas and Denver, and they just announced Washington, D.C. And if you think of the suit and ties of D.C., where every second person you meet's a lawyer versus Meow Wolf, it's just a wonderful mix. So that's going to be exciting to see how they continue to grow and succeed. Then I'm looking to see how they spend education money. More specifically, the judge has said you're not spending enough on at-risk people. How does that work out? Where's the money going? Is it going to go to kids and to improving their education?
That's a good point. Let me ask you another one about your hometown of Santa Fe. Anything you're watching particularly in Santa Fe that might be bubbling, coming to the surface in 2019? Anything with the Weber administration, or we've got interesting council situation there. We've also got some economic development going at the rail yards that could be very interesting too. There's a lot of things going on in Santa Fe right now.
It almost seems like one of those times where all the things are coming together. The big thing to watch with Weber is whether he can keep his promises to build houses. We are like 4,000 or 5,000 units short, supposedly. Several apartment complexes have been approved. There's going to be a lot more in the works, and there's a big kind of overreaching housing plan that's going to look at vacant lots in all parts of the city, so that when it goes before the Planning Commission and the City Council, one neighborhood can't stop it because it's in my neighborhood, because it's going to be in all neighborhoods. So I think getting housing to where it's a little bit more affordable is going to be important to keep Santa Fe a more diverse and, in terms of youth to aging kind of, and rich and poor. So that's huge. And I think also he said, he's going to make things work. So if in the spring you still have lots of weeds, you don't have parks that are fixed, you have potholes, people don't necessarily care if they pass a resolution on pot. They want to not have their car axle go out when they go down the street.
That's fair enough.
So get back to the real basics.
Good
and
point
if you
there.
do that, you take care of the rest.
Good stuff, guys. I appreciate that. 2019 is going to be a very pivotal year, but it's hard to look ahead, and I appreciate taking the effort. Thank you all for your opinions and your work this year as well. Keep it up in 2019. We'll see you soon in Focus.